Hey guys, tonight we begin with a whisper you've probably heard before. Two teenagers, a secluded road, an engine idling beneath moonlight, and somewhere in the trees, a hook. It's the kind of story that lives in the breath between heartbeats, the sort of tale whispered through car windows when the night feels too quiet. You've likely heard a version of it, haven't you? A couple parked at Lover's Lane, music low, fog creeping in over the windshield. One hears a scratching sound. Maybe it's just a branch, maybe it's nothing, but still they leave. And when they get home, there it is. A single hook, rusty, twisted, embedded in the door handle. And they never even saw him. The Hookman. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're sitting in the passenger seat of an old Chevy, upholstery worn smooth from years of summer drives and late-night escapes. There's a radio DJ murmuring some slow jazz. The windows are starting to fog. And somewhere, just beyond the reach of the headlights, the woods lean in. It's a warm Friday night in 1950s America, the kind of night where everything feels possible if a little reckless. Lovers' lanes are all the rage now, quiet spots off old back roads where teenagers sneak away to kiss, smoke, and pretend they're braver than they really are. You feel safe, sort of, until the music cuts out, and the DJ's voice returns, shaken. We interrupt this broadcast with an urgent bulletin. A patient has escaped from the state hospital. He is described as tall, with one arm ending in a steel hook, considered dangerous. If you are in the area, please remain indoors. And just like that, the night changes. You've heard this version before, haven't you? Maybe your older cousin told it to you with a flashlight under their chin. Maybe you read it in one of those black and red True Scary Stories books in middle school. But here's the twist. It didn't start in just one place. The Hookman tale didn't crawl out of a single forest or asylum. It bloomed in gas stations, in truck stops, in school hallways, in late-night car rides where someone dared to say, "What if something's out there?" The earliest versions weren't about a hook at all. Some say it began with tales of escaped convicts or war veterans gone mad. Others point to World War II amputees returning home, struggling to reintegrate into a society that didn't quite understand them. The hook, in that way, became more than just a weapon. It became a symbol of something lost, something dangerous, something no longer fully human. And that's what made it so chilling. Not just the violence it implied, but what it represented. That fear you feel when someone doesn't fit the world around them anymore. By the mid-20th century, the hook was firmly part of the legend. A replacement limb turned into an instrument of dread. You can almost see it now shining faintly in the dark, smeared with something you don't want to name. And you realize, this isn't just a campfire story. It's a warning. Don't park where you shouldn't. Don't wander off alone. Don't think you're immune to danger just because it hasn't touched you yet. And so the Hookman waits. Not in the shadows of some forest, but in the silence between kisses, in the fog on the glass, in the faint scrape that might be a branker, something much worse. And before long, you'll understand why the hook never rusts. The story always changes slightly depending on who's telling it, but the ending, that almost never shifts. You're back home, safe. The night's unease begins to wear off. Maybe you're laughing about how nervous you got. Maybe you're still trying to explain that weird scratching sound on the roof. And then, you go to shut the door, and there it is, hooked onto the handle. Jagged, old, still damp, a hook. This moment is the spine of the legend, the freeze frame, the image burned into a million imaginations. The bloody hook, not because it's the most frightening part, but because it's what makes the whole story real. You didn't see him, you didn't hear him, but he was there. He reached out so close to pulling the door open and you didn't even know. And the implication? It's worse than any scream or chase scene. Because if you'd waited even a few seconds longer, if you'd kissed just once more, you wouldn't be here. That's what gives the Hookman his strength. He doesn't need to swing a weapon or burst out of the woods. He just needs you to almost die. to leave you with the sense that fate just barely tilted in your favor, like flipping a coin and having it land on its edge. This hook-in-the-door story began appearing widely in American folklore during the 1950s, and by the 60s, it had become one of the most well-known urban legends in the United States. Sociologists noted how it spread through high school rumors, local newspapers, and even roadside billboards. Yes, there were actual warning signs reminding teenagers not to park in remote areas. All of it reinforcing one quiet, unspoken message: don't trust the dark. What's interesting, though, is how the story plays on restraint. Unlike a traditional monster, the Hookman doesn't always kill. Sometimes, he just gets close. And that's what sticks with you. Not the blood, not the chase, but the idea that he was right there and chose not to strike. Or worse a treat, and missed. Some say this part of the tale was shaped by parents trying to scare their kids straight. In the era of poodle skirts and Elvis Presley, teenagers were pushing boundary sand. The Hookman was the invisible hand trying to pull them back. Go ahead and park in the woods, the story whispers. But don't be surprised if you come home with more than just lipstick smudges and old records. And let's talk about that hook for a second. It's not just a weapon, it's a statement. Unlike a knife or an axe, a hook implies something was lost. A hand, a past, a person. It's a clue that whoever or whatever is out there used to be something human. But now it's something else entirely. Twisted, mangled, made into myth. And every time that hook shows you embedded in a door, dangling from a tree branch, rusted and blackened in a police evidence badge, it reaffirms the same chilling truth. You were a few inches from not making it. That's all. Just inches. And the Hookman? He's still out there. Still missing one hand. Still dragging that jagged, heavy hook through the leaves, waiting for the next door that doesn't quite shut all the way. You know what's eerie about the Hookman? It's how neatly he fits into a very specific time in American history right after World War II, when everything was supposed to be perfect. Suburbs were booming. Car culture was king. Teenagers had freedom like never before. Drive-ins, diners, weekend cruising, it all painted a picture of shiny optimism. But underneath that, Norman Rockwell postcard was something else. A pulsing undercurrent of paranoia. This was the era when moms warned you not to talk to strangers, and dads kept a baseball bat by the front door not because they expected trouble, but because trouble had a way of showing up when you least expected it. And that's where the Hookman slides in. A ghost of a different kind of America. Not polished chrome and pressed trousers, but rust, loneliness, and trauma no one really talked about. Some folklorists believe the Hookman emerged as a response to post-war anxieties. Think about it. A man with a missing hand? It echoes wounded veterans, those who came back from the war changed, disfigured, hardened by what they'd seen. The hook wasn't just scary. It was a scar. A reminder that the world could fall apart at any moment, even on a quiet date night. Then there's the Hookman as the other. The stranger who doesn't fit into white picket fence society. He's not welcome at the dance. He doesn't have a job at the plant. He's out there, roaming the woods, watching the people who do belong. And whether he's real or not doesn't matter, because what he represents is, he's every fear that couldn't be talked about in polite company: rage, grief, deviance, shame. He's a cautionary tale with a pulse. In some of the earliest newspaper mentions from the 1950s, reporters linked the Hookman legend to nearby asylums or correctional facilities. You'll notice how often these stories include a radio bulletin about an escaped patient. That's not by accident. America, in the post-war boom, was obsessed with containment, of enemies, of secrets, of anything that didn't fit the image. And the Hookman? He was the one thing that kept breaking out. People said he was a veteran who never made it home, or an inmate who escaped during a transfer, or a drifter who lost his hand in a sawmill accident and decided to punish the world for forgetting him. Each version said something different, but the message was always the same. Don't stray too far from the crowd, because the man in the woods doesn't care how in love you are. Interestingly, the Hookman also reflects the era's discomfort with teenage freedom. Cars gave young people the ability to disappear at least for a few hours from the rules of home and school. And what did they do with that freedom? They parked in the dark, so the legend gave them a reason to think twice. Because what if someone was waiting in that darkness? Someone old, someone angry, someone who doesn't believe you've earned the right to be so carefree. And this is where the Hookman's power deepens. Because he's not just an external threat, he's a moral one. He's what happens when you cross a line you shouldn't, even if it's just parking past curfew. He doesn't roar or rant. He just waits. Quiet. Patient. Listening for the soft thump of music inside a fogged-up car. Then he drags his hook once along the door. Just enough to let you know he's here. And maybe he's always been. You'd think a legend like the Hookman would have one definitive version, the same story passed from town to town like a hand-me-down sweater. But no. The Hookman changes. Not wildly, not beyond recognition, but just enough. A different setting here, a twist there, a sharper edge tucked into the ending. Like the hook itself, the story adapts blunt or jagged depending on who's telling it. In Ohio, he drags his hook along the car roof, making rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape sounds just above your head. In Alabama, he doesn't leave a hook behind. He leaves deep gouges in the side of the vehicle, as if he was trying to claw his way in. In Wisconsin, he's said to appear only during the full moon, tapping his hook once for each night you've parked in the same place. And in parts of Texas? Well, in Texas, he waits until you're almost home. Then he whispers your name from the back seat. These aren't separate monsters. They're the same Hookman reflected in regional mirrors, shaped by local fear. The essence never changes. It's always about that moment, the realization that you were never truly alone. Even small towns have their own pet versions. Ask around, and someone's uncle or neighbor's cousin once saw a man with a metal arm standing at the edge of the woods, just watching. Sometimes he chases, sometimes he vanishes. Sometimes he leaves behind nothing but a single, rusty scratch along the doorframe. But the legend always loops back to that question. What if you'd stayed just a few seconds longer? And here's where it gets fascinating. These regional variants didn't spread through books or the internet, not at first. They spread orally, from friend to friend, across generations, whispered in parked cars and late-night walks home from school. Every telling came with a wink. This happened near here. My friend's brother saw him. The hook is still in the sheriff's evidence locker downtown. Each version added weight, the kind that makes you check your back seat on the drive home, even if you don't believe in anything. In one version from Maine, the Hookman doesn't just knock, he speaks. A gravelly voice calling out from the trees. Leave the door unlocked, just once. That's it. No chase, no blood. But that single line? It's enough to keep the story alive for decades. That's the secret to urban legends. They evolve. The Hookman of the 1950s may have been warning teens not to park and fool around. But by the 80s, he'd become a more violent figure mirroring society's growing anxiety about serial killers, strangers, and vulnerability. And now he's digital. A Reddit thread here, a TikTok voiceover there, a photo passed around of a rusted hook nailed to a tree beside a makeshift shrine. The Hookman endures because he mutates. Just enough to feel new, just enough to feel local. So wherever you are, the woods outside town, the gravel pull-off near the bridge, that spot behind the old grocery store where couples still sneak away, there's probably a version of the Hookman waiting there. Not because he lives in that place, but because his story does. And stories? They're the most dangerous creatures of all. You might think the Hookman is just one story, one single tale that somehow got out of control. But that's not quite right. It's more like he was born in 100 places at once. Whispered into life behind gas stations, around campfires, through late-night phone calls, and poorly Xeroxed scary storybooks passed around at school. Each region added something different. Each storyteller sharpened or softened the edges. And soon enough, there wasn't just one Hookman. There were many. In Wisconsin, he's a war vet who went mad after his fiancée was unfaithful. His ghost still roams the edges of secluded roads, searching for couples in parked cars, punishing them for what he thinks he lost. In Louisiana, he's tied to a swampside prison break. The locals say he escaped into the bayou, replaced his hand with a boat hook, and now he slinks through the reeds, dragging it behind him. You can hear it if you're quiet enough. Scrape, scrape, scrape. In parts of New England, the legend skips the hook altogether and calls him the Scratcher. A man in a wide-brimmed hat with a gnarled, sharpened cane who drags it along dorm windows late at night. But the story ends the same way every time. He got close. Too close. And he left a mark. That's the unspoken rule in all these versions. He doesn't always kill. In fact, more often than not, he leaves his calling card behind a symbol, a sound, something to let you know he was inches away. It's almost like he wants to be remembered more than he wants to cause harm, as if the fear is more important than the result. Some communities added their own twists. In rural Ohio, he taps 3 times on the roof of the car before vanishing into the trees. No blood, no scratch. Just 3 deliberate taps in later. When you check, the roof is dented. In Montana, kids say if you flash your high beams 3 times on a lonely road, he appears in your rearview mirror standing inside the car behind you, even if you're alone. The Hookman becomes a kind of folkloric shapeshifter, not because he physically changes, but because we change him. We mold him into the shape of our local fears. Is your town plagued by strange disappearances? The Hookman becomes a kidnapper. Live near an old mill? He's the ghost of a mutilated worker. Have a haunted road that people speed down at night? Suddenly, the Hookman's warning people to slow down, or else. Even within a single state, the variations multiply. Some say he wears a long coat and smells like rust. Others describe him as gaunt, barefoot, with stringy black hair and a hook that glows faintly red, like it's still hot. And still others say he wears no coat, no hatches the hook, gleaming in the moonlight like a grin. But no matter how the details change, the feeling never does. That creeping tension, that sense of being watched, that realization that someone or something was almost close enough to touch you. You turn on your dome light and check the back seat. You scan the trees. You check your car door for scratches, just in case. And that's why the Hookman legend refuses to die. Because you don't need to believe in monsters. You just need to doubt your safety for a moment. One flicker of unease, one creaking branch outside your window, 1 second where you think, what if I didn't lock the door? The Hookman doesn't need your belief, just your attention. He thrives in fragments and footnotes, in flickering memories and secondhand stories. And maybe, just maybe, you already know someone who swears they heard the hook scrape once. Just once. Of all the theories that orbit the Hookman legend, there's one that digs deepest into our skin knot, the ghost. Not the warning, but the escapee. It's the version your older cousin swore was true, the one kids whispered after curfew, the one that begins not with a hook, but with a hospital, a dark window, a broken chain, and an empty bed. This version paints the Hookman not as a spirit, but a man flesh and blood, dangerous, escaped from a nearby asylum or prison, mentally unstable, unstoppable. You know the setup. A high-security transport vehicle crashes during a thunderstorm. Somewhere along the wooded road, he vanishes into the trees, leaving only twisted metal and 2 guards who won't stop screaming. Or maybe he disappears during a fire, amid flickering alarms and red strobe lights, dragging his hooked arm behind him as he limps into the fog. And the worst part? They never catch him. You've probably heard a version that ends with, "They say he still lives in the woods near here." It's always near here, because that's the genius of the escapee theory. It localizes the fear. It makes the Hookman not just a cautionary tale from some far-off town, but your cautionary tale. It's not about what he is. It's about how close he might be. In Maryland, the Hookman is said to haunt a defunct psychiatric facility on the edge of the forest. Teens dare each other to visit the crumbling ruin at night. They say you can hear dragging sounds across the floorboards metal against stone. In Nevada, he's the result of a secret experimental facility gone wrong. A man left abandoned after surgeries and shock therapy, his mind unraveling as they tried to replace his lost hand with military-grade steel. Absurd? Sure. But when you hear the hook scrape across the roof of your car, absurd doesn't feel so far off anymore. And maybe that's why this version scares us most. Because it removes the supernatural comfort of saying, that's just a ghost. A ghost? You can close the book, blow out the candle. But an escaped, man-damaged, violent, and still out there? That's a monster that doesn't wait until you sleep. That's a nightmare that walks. The escapee theory also introduces the idea of unfinished business. that the Hookman isn't just violent searching for something. Revenge, closure, a return to a life that no longer exists. Some say he was left at the altar, his bride fleeing before the vows. When he chased after her, he lost his hand in a car accident. They say he wanders the back roads, seeking cars with lovers inside, punishing them for what he never got to have. It's poetic, in a sick sort of way, but it explains the pattern, doesn't it? He always finds couples, always shows up when hearts are wide open and windows are just slightly cracked. The escapee also flips the script. He's not an old ghost wandering the earth for centuries. He could have been born in your generation, a man twisted by trauma, consumed by rage, reinvented by whispers and retellings until he was more myth than memory. And yet, he might still be out there, walking, watching. The idea is simple. If something goes wrong at a facility near you, if sirens wail through the trees one night, if the police never find him, then he becomes your Hookman, your story, your reason to check behind the shower curtain, to hit the lock button twice on the car door, to glance just once more into the rearview mirror. Not because you believe in legends, but because legends believe in you. And this one, it likes to stay close. Of all the masks the Hookman wears, perhaps the most familiar and the most insidiosus, the morality tale. You've heard the setup a dozen times. Two teenagers sneak out past curfew. They drive to a secluded spot. The music plays, the world fades, and then scratch, scratch, scratch. The legend doesn't need to shout its warning. It whispers it through rusty metal and creaking branches. Because this story, it's not just meant to scare you. It's meant to shape you. See, urban legends often work like old fairy tales. They're less about monsters and more about boundaries. Step outside the rules just a little and something comes to punish you. In this case, it's a hook. But really, it could be anything. A curse, a shadow, a scrape along the door just loud enough to make your heart jump. Back in the 1950s and 60s, when the Hookman first began making serious rounds, America was neck-deep in social rules. Girls were told to stay modest. Boys were expected to behave like gentlemen. And the car? The car was both freedom and temptation. So along comes a story, not from a sermon or a textbook, but from your peers, your cousin, your best friend, a kid 2 grades ahead who swears it happened just down the road. A story that says, if you mess around in the dark might mess back. And this framing still works, because it doesn't come from authority. It feels like truth, and it makes just enough sense to stick. You snuck out. You ignored the warnings. You were careless. And now something's at your door. But here's where the legend turns clever. It doesn't always end in death. In fact, in many of the most popular versions, the couple escapes. They hear the scratching, panic, and drive off. Only later safely at home do they discover the hook. And what does that do? It rewards the characters who pull back, who say no, who return to the path. It's not just a horror story, it's a parable. Of course, not everyone buys into that message. And over the decades, some storytellers flipped it on its head. In one version, the couple ignores the noise, laughs it off, and pays the price. In another, they never hear the scratching because the Hookman was already inside the car. And suddenly, the tale isn't about morality at all. It's about vulnerability, about how even when you think your safe windows up, doors locked danger can be closer than you realize. Still, that moral edge never fully disappears. Even today, parents might retell the Hookman story when their kids start dating, not to scare them silly, but to make them think. About choices, about risk, about how far they're willing to go before the story changes. Because the Hookman doesn't just punish you for what you've done, he punishes you for what you almost did. And here's the eerie part. Even when we know it's a legend, we listen. We laugh nervously when the car stalls in a remote area. We glance at the tree line when the wind picks up. We triple-check the back seat not because we think someone's there, but because, well, what if? The Hookman, as morality tale, doesn't demand your belief, just your obedience. And in that way, he becomes a kind of twisted guardian. Not holy, not just, but watching, waiting for the next choice you make in the dark. And if you make the wrong one, he'll let you know, one scrape at a time. Now, let's talk about a version of the legend that doesn't get as much airtime but deserves it. It's the one where the Hookman doesn't come from outside the car. He comes from inside it. This variant skips the classic scratch on the door. It skips the bloody hook left behind. Instead, it starts quietly, almost warmly. You're driving home, alone. Maybe from a date, maybe from work, maybe from nowhere in particular, just trying to clear your head. It's late. The road is empty. The hum of the tires is soft and steady. You feel safe, until something in your rearview mirror moves. It's subtle at first, a shadow behind your seat, the shape of something where nothing should be. Or maybe just a feeling like the air in the car shifted. You don't want to look again, but you do. And this time, it's not just a shape. It's a man, sitting in your back seat, silent, still, and where his right hand should be is a hook. This twist on the Hookman legend doesn't always involve teenagers or lovers' lanes. Sometimes it's a young woman driving home from a late shift. Sometimes it's a trucker heading through a mountain pass. Sometimes it's you, just trying to get somewhere before midnight. But the message is always the same. You never saw him get in. And that's the part that chills you the most, because it means the danger was already with you before you even locked the doors. This version gained traction in the 1980s and 90s, likely influenced by the rise of real-world fear show invasions, hitchhikers, carjackings. It shifted the Hookman from an external threat-a-man lurking in the wood stove, something more invasive. He doesn't need the trees anymore. He's riding with you. There's a particularly unsettling version from Oregon where a girl drives off after arguing with her parents. She calms down, starts the long ride back, sees a figure standing in the road, slams on her brakes, but when she looks again, the road is empty. She shrugs it off, keeps driving. Only when she gets home and checks the back seat does she find it. Not a body, not blood, just a single metal hook lying flat across the seat, still warm. Sometimes he's waiting with eyes closed. Sometimes his hook is resting gently on your shoulder by the time you realize he's there. And in the most haunting versions, he never speaks, never moves. You just know somehow that he's been there the entire time. Psychologically, this variant taps into a more intimate fear, the kind that isn't about being chased, but about being invaded. Your car is supposed to be your sanctuary, a place you control, your little mobile fortress. And the Hookman breaks that illusion. He bypasses locks. He ignores alarms. He waits. And what does he want? That's never clear. Sometimes he's punishing you for something. Sometimes he just wants the ride. And sometimes he simply disappears before you reach your destination, leaving you shaken, unsure if he was ever real. This version also flips the usual structure of horror. There's no approach, no slow tension, no chase. He's already here. The fear is retroactive. How long was he back there? Did he hear you singing along to the radio? Did he watch you check your hair in the mirror? Did he smile? What makes this Hookman so chilling isn't that he attacks. It's that he doesn't have to. He could have hurt you. But instead, he just let you know you weren't alone. That's a different kind of horror. Not loud, not bloody, just close. By the time the 1970s rolled around, the Hookman had slipped from backseat whispers into the cultural bloodstream. He wasn't just a campfire story anymore. He was a phenomenon. Thanks in part to the rise of true crime radio segments, tabloid headlines, and scary story anthologies that had just the right amount of based on real events to make your skin crawl. And once he found his way onto the airwaves, he never left. There was something about the Hookman that fit perfectly with late-night radio. Picture it. You're driving along an empty stretch of highway. The stars are sharp overhead. The headlights eat the road in quiet, rhythmic pulses. And then the host's voice cuts in. Our next story comes from a caller in Kansas City. She says the hook was still dripping when they found it. Click. That's all it took. One sentence. And suddenly, you're watching your mirrors a little too closely. During this era, every radio station seemed to have a true Hookman encounter segment, usually around Halloween. usually with just enough hesitation in the caller's voice to sound believable. Sometimes the hook was found at a rest stop, sometimes at a campsite. Sometime, chillingly hook marks were found inside the car. And the best part? None of them ever quite finished the story. There was always a missing detail, a broken transmission, a file that police never released. That was the trick, wasn't it? Keep just enough mystery to let your imagination do the rest. This is when the Hookman legend really took root. Because by now, it wasn't just one story, it was 1,000 small ones. Passed between classmates, shared in hushed tones at sleepovers, scribbled in notebooks during detention, and all of them ended the same way. I swear it's true. Television helped too. Crime shows, horror anthologies, even cartoons started referencing the tale. The man with the hook became a kind of shorthand for danger in the dark. You'd see a silhouette with a glinting prosthetic, and you'd know exactly what was coming. He never needed a name. He was just the Hookman. Some networks even aired dramatized retellings of Hookman sightings, complete with grainy reenactments and dramatic narration. You know the kind. Fog, soft piano music, a couple of actors who look just nervous enough to sell the fear, and always that final shot of the hook swinging slowly in the wind, as if the man himself had just missed his moment by seconds. This period also gave rise to the idea that the Hookman is real. Not metaphorically, not symbolically. Literally, that somewhere out there, there's a man disfigured, bitter, angry who uses the stories as cover. He wants you to think it's a legend, because legends don't get caught. That little idea that the Hookman might be hiding among the fiction breathed new life into the myth. Suddenly, every abandoned car was a crime scene. Every scratch on your door was a maybe. And every time you saw a news report about a missing couple or an unsolved attack on a roadside pull-off, the thought crept in. It couldn't be, right? But maybe. Just maybe. It was. Because that's the genius of the Hookman legend. It doesn't need you to fully believe. It only needs a sliver of doubt, a crack in the door, a window left slightly open. And once it's in, it stays. Quiet. Unassuming. Until the radio crackles again one night and a voice says, "This next call might make you want to check your back seat." At some point, something strange happened. The Hookman stopped belonging to just one place. He became somehow everywhere. No longer tied to a single state or back road, his story bloomed like fog across the map. A legend with no fixed address, just coordinates whispered in different accents. Every small town seemed to claim a piece of him. And honestly, they weren't exactly wrong. Take Michigan, for example. In the Upper Peninsula, they say the Hookman haunts the old logging roads. Local teens swear if you idle too long near mile marker 17, you'll hear tapping from the woods like metal against birch. In that version, he lost his hand in a mill accident, betrayed by the very machinery that fed his family. Now, he's bitter, resentful, and drawn to the warmth of car engines. Some say he isn't violent, just cold, trying to borrow a little heat from the living. Then you've got Texas. Oh, Texas has a few Hookmen. There's the one from Waco who's said to crawl across fences like a spider, dragging his hook behind him in slow, scratchy circles. There's another in West Texas, near an abandoned drive-in. They say he shows up on film reels left running too long, just a flicker in the frame, pausing between scenes. And in the border towns, he's called El Gancho, the hook. And down there, he doesn't just chase, he judges. Even the UK claims their own version. In Sussex, an old urban legend tells of the Tallyman, a spirit with a bladed prosthetic who marks car doors with tally scratches before a loved one dies. A strange echo of our own hook-handed figure, but with a chilling British twist. Not a killer, a counter. The point is this: the Hookman moves like folklore, slipping through dialects, swapping details, clinging to the bones of a good story while wearing a different face. And everywhere he goes, he finds something that makes him feel local. A real murder, a stretch of lonely road, a defunct asylum with no paper trail, just enough truth to give the fiction teeth. In fact, one of the eeriest parts of the Hookman's global spread is how similar the stories remain. Always a couple, Always a car, always that awful, metallic scraping. No matter the country or culture, people instinctively imagine him just outside their window pressing close, dragging that hook in lazy, deliberate arcs. It's as if the Hookman isn't just a legend, but a template, a fear so universal, it transcends borders. Even Australia has its version. Out in the bushland, there's a story of a ghostly truck driver who lost his arm in a fire and replaced it with a meat hook. He's said to haunt isolated stretches of the Stuart Highway, appearing in the mirror just before a crash. Some say he doesn't cause accidents. He warns about them, a death that narrowly didn't happen, thanks to a sudden chill and the sound of scraping metal. So, how do we explain this? How does a tale that supposedly began in a Midwestern American town show up in folklore around the world? Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe it's cultural osmosis. Or maybe, just maybe, the Hookman was never born in one place. Maybe he's always been there, waiting. Because really, the Hookman isn't about where he is. He's about where you are. He's about the road you take home, the forest that edges your school, the parking lot behind your church. Wherever there's a dark corner and a reason to linger, the Hookman finds a way in. So next time you hear someone say, "Oh, that's just an American thing," you might want to check the map again. Because that hook-shaped mark on your back door, it didn't come from overseas. It came from right here. Let's take a moment to talk about sound. Because when it comes to the Hookman, it's not what you see that stays with you. It's what you hear. The scrape of metal against metal. The sudden tap on the roof. The soft, rhythmic clink of a hook dragging along pavement barely audible over the hum of your car's engine. Sound is his calling card. And in many versions of the legend, it's the only warning you get. In some tellings, the noise is steady scrape, scrape, scrape always at the edge of hearing, just enough to prick the skin on the back of your neck. It starts faint, like a distant tree branch tapping against your door, but then it repeats. Same rhythm, same pressure, same space between each pass. It doesn't match the wind, it doesn't change with your speed, and slowly, your heart starts to sink to that awful cadence. Scrape, scrape, scrape. There's a version from New Hampshire where the couple doesn't even see the Hookman. They just hear him. The girl swears she hears something dragging along the gravel road outside their parked car. The boy gets out, flashlight in hand, brushing it off. She waits, and waits, and waits. Finally, she hears the scratching again, but it's on the roof. She doesn't know what it is, until the next morning, when they find the boyfriend's body hanging from a branch overhead, and the scraping, that was his feet. Of course, that's a more violent version, not as common, but still told. Other versions use sound more subtly. In upstate New York, there's a local tradition of rolling your car windows down while passing through Hookman Hollow. They say if you drive slow enough, you'll hear someone whisper your name. No shouting, no banging, just that breathy syllable your name, twice then silence. People who try it report hearing something. Not always words, sometimes just static, or a laugh. One guy said it sounded like a chain being coiled. He never drove that route again. Some theorize that the emphasis on sound in these stories taps into an old primal fear. See, the dark can be explained with light. But noise? Noise comes from something. And if you can't see it, your mind fills in the blanks. What kind of hook makes that sound? How close must it be to make you hear it inside the car? What happens if the next scrape isn't from the outside? Even in modern versions of the legend, where kids share stories online or through found footage videos, the Hookman's presence is usually heard first. A creak on the porch, a distorted knock picked up by a camera microphone, a radio signal interrupted by a metallic clatter no one can explain. It's never just a jump scare, it's lingering. Something wrong with the sound. In fact, there's an entire creepypasta community that focuses on Hookman audio, distorted recordings of rhythmic metal sounds, or recreations of what the hook might sound like, dragging along different surfaces, glass, wood, denim. It's chilling because it's mundane. There's no monster roaring, no voice cursing, just a sound that feels too close. In some versions, the Hookman's approach is marked by silence instead. No birds, no wind, just an unnatural hush, as if the world is holding its breath, then a tap, then a scrape, then nothing. And it's in that silence stretched thin like old tape that your imagination starts doing terrible work. Because deep down, we all know something. It's not the hook that gets you. It's the warning you ignore. And when the sound stops completely, well, that's when it's already too late. There's one version of the Hookman story that stands out not for how scary it is, but for how sad it feels. It's the one where he never wanted to hurt anyone at all. Not really. Where the hook isn't a weapon, but a wound. In this telling, he was just a man. A quiet, solitary man, living on the edge of town. People said he kept to himself, worked odd jobs, didn't cause any trouble. But one winter, there was an accident. A piece of equipment snapped at the factory where he worked, and his right hand was mangled beyond saving. He survived, but barely. And when he returned to Town Hook where a hand used to be, whispers started. He didn't look the same anymore. Didn't move the same. People kept their distance. Children pointed from across the street. And soon, he stopped leaving his house at all. Except at night. They say he wandered then, just to feel like he existed somewhere beyond his own front porch. He walked the tree line, followed old roads, not stalking, just existing. And that's when the stories began. You know how it goes. A couple parked too long, heard something outside, panicked, drove off then, found a hook at the door handle. But maybe, just maybe, he wasn't trying to hurt anyone. Maybe he was just reaching out. This softer version doesn't get told as often. Maybe because it blurs the line too much, makes the monster a little too human. But if you listen for it, if you ask the right people in the right town, you'll hear fragments of it. And sometimes those fragments include an old man who lived alone, a hook he made himself from scrap metal, a journal filled with dates and names, not of people he hurt, of people he saved. There's a story from Montana about a girl who swerved to avoid a deer late at night and crashed her car into a snowbank. No cell signal, no houses for miles. She blacked out. When she came to, she was sitting upright, buckled in. The engine was still running, the heater was on, and the windshield? Completely cleared of snow. On the outside, just one thing. A smear, shaped like a hook. In that version, the Hookman isn't a killer. He's a guardian. A bitter one, sure. A lonely one, but not cruel. He watches the dark corners of the world where real danger hides, and sometimes he intervenes. But no one ever thanks him because all they see is the hook. So the legend endures, twisted, misunderstood, and perhaps a little wrong. Folklorists argue that this reading is a kind of cultural correction, a way of reclaiming something frightening and giving it heart, taking a figure of menace and saying, maybe he's just trying to warn us. Maybe he's the shadow between us and something worse. And you know what? There's a kind of comfort in that idea, that maybe not all the monsters in the dark are hunting us. Maybe some are just watching, waiting for the right moment to tap on the glass, and make sure we get home safely. So next time you hear a story where the Hookman shows up but nothing bad happens, where the couple gets away, or the driver makes it home, maybe don't roll your eyes. Maybe that was on purpose. Let's shift the lens a bit from the roads and lovers' Lenesto, a place you might not expect the Hookman to show up. The woods. Because while many of the most popular versions center around cars, a surprising number of regional legends place him deep in the trees, not on the road, not chasing your taillights, but waiting among the roots and shadows. And somehow, that's worse. See, the Hookman doesn't move like a wild animal. He doesn't crash through the brush or snarl from the dark. He's quiet in the woods, intentional. Locals in rural Pennsylvania say he walks with his head slightly tilted, like he's listening not for sound, but for thoughts. They claim the hook amplifies emotion, that if you're afraid, he knows it. If you're guilty, he can smell it. And if you run, well, you've already made his job easier. In one story from northern Idaho, 3 teens wander off a hiking trail after sundown, joking about the Hookman to scare each other. But then they find it. Not him, just a tree. Deep gouges spiral up the bark like someone dragged a blade around and around and around. Fresh, still weeping sap. They go silent, and from somewhere just off the trail, tap, tap, tap. Not approaching, not charging, just present. The forest versions often give the Hookman an almost ritualistic feel. They say he doesn't chase for sport, he selects. One version from Oregon describes a clearing where no grass grows. People leave trinkets, coins, locks of hair, handwritten apologies, all to keep him satisfied. Because apparently, the Hookman in those woods doesn't take everyone, just the ones who don't leave something behind. In Appalachian country, he's tied to the coal mines. A man who lost his arm in a cave-in and returned to haunt the forest edge near the entrance. Some versions say he strikes his hook against rock walls 3 times before appearing. Others say you hear him dragging it behind him across loose gravel, the sound echoing for miles in the still night air. There's even an urban legend out of Kentucky where the Hookman is mistaken for a hunter. Locals talk about the man with the crooked rifle, who walks the tree line wearing a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat. But those who've gotten close enough say it's not a rifle. It's his arm. And when you ask those folks what happened next, they never give a clear answer. They just say they didn't go back into those woods. Not after dark, not alone, not ever again. So why the woods? Why take a story so often tied to vehicles and transplant it into the trees? Maybe because the forest, like the Hookman, is a liminal space. It's not home, not civilization. It's the edge of things. And what lives at the edge? The stuff that doesn't want to be seen? The things that don't follow your rules. In this environment, the Hookman becomes almost mythological. Not just a man, not even a ghost, but a spirit of boundary breaking. The consequence for wandering too far, for stepping off the trail, for ignoring the signs, and in these stories, he rarely speaks. If he does, it's a whisper wind like in hollow. A simple question, always the same. Do you know where you are? Because if you don't, then maybe, just maybe, you shouldn't be here at all. Now, what happens when a legend like the Hookman escapes the woods, the roads, and the hushed gossip of small town sand slips into the digital age? Because he does. He has. And he's still scraping at the edges of our screens, hooks and all. It started slowly. A handful of early creepypasta posts. A comment thread on a ghost hunting forum in the early 2000s. Someone asking, "Has anyone else heard about the guy with the hook for a hand?" And it bloomed. Suddenly, he was no longer limited to local lore. He became shareable, editable, personalized, and somehow more terrifying. The internet didn't dilute the Hookman. It amplified him. YouTube videos dramatized the story, giving him a face or at least a silhouette. People made short films, posted night vision sightings, and uploaded recordings of strange tapping sounds near abandoned cabins. And then came the ARG's alternate reality games where users pieced together fake crime scenes, photographs of rusted hooks, and supposed voice memos from survivors who heard him scratching at their car windows. Some of these were obvious fiction. Others blurred the line just enough to make people pause. One of the more unsettling examples was a series of posts on an old paranormal subreddit. Each was a different user, all within the same week, all describing eerily similar experiences. Their car wouldn't start. They heard a faint sound like metal on glass. They found a curved indentation along the back fender. Different towns, different names, but the hook was always the same. It spiraled into a theory that the Hookman was a tulpa thought, form entity created and sustained by belief, that the more people told the story, the more real he became. Not metaphorically, literally, a shape given life through attention, through fear, and now that he lived online, his reach was limitless. There was a TikTok trend for a while too, teens locking themselves in parked cars and playing the Hookman challenge. The rules were simple. Park near a forest or an empty lot. Turn off the engine. Don't speak. Wait. Some swear their phones picked up a strange interference. One video shows frost forming on a car window in the shape of a curved hook. Another ends with the user laughing nervously, until they stop. Eyes wide, the video cuts to black. And then there are the people who go looking for him. Urban explorers, paranormal vloggers, curiosity junkies. They go to the known Hookman spots, places where versions of the story supposedly took place. They bring equipment, EMF readers, heat sensors, drones. And what do they find? Usually nothing. But sometimes, they come back with audio. subtle, a dragging sound, too consistent to be wind, too irregular to be an animal, always looping, always just out of frame. Of course, skeptics say it's just folklore going digital. But here's the thing. In the age of endless information, folklore evolves. It updates. It adapts to your fears. So while the Hookman of 1955 might have been a cautionary tale about morality, the Hookman of today, he's about vulnerability in the age of connectivity. He's not in the forest anymore. He's in the comments section, the corrupted voicemail, the unlisted number that keeps calling back, even after you block it. He doesn't need to hide in the shadows now. He's in your inbox, waiting for you to open that one weird email at 2:00 a.m. titled, "Did you lock the car?" And maybe it's silly. Maybe it's just pixels and imagination. But maybe, just maybe, modern legends don't knock at your window anymore. Maybe they appear as a file you can't delete, a tap you can't trace, a sound you only hear through your headphones when no one else is around. So by now, you're probably wondering, has anyone ever actually seen him? Not just in stories or TikToks or scratchy audio files, but in real life, something tangible, something official. And that's when we enter the world of police reports. Or, more specifically, the urban legend of the police reports. Because while no public database contains a Hookman entry, there are just enough weird cases floating around to give believers something to chew on. Let's take a look. In 1972, there was an incident in Fairfax County, Virginia, arguably the most infamous real-world Hookman report on record. A young couple claimed they were attacked by a man in a white bunny suit, wielding a hatchet. Yes, a bunny suit. The attacker supposedly smashed their car window while shouting about trespassers. Police investigated but found no suspect. The story spiraled. Headlines dubbed him the Bunny Man. But to those in the know, the Bunny Man was just another mask. Another alias for the hook-wielding figure who always seems to show up where lovers gather and fear spreads fastest. In rural Tennessee, there's a report from 1994 of a vehicle found abandoned on a back road. The doors were open, the keys still in the ignition, and on the driver's side mirror, a clean, crescent-shaped dent like something had scraped it. Hard. The interior was undisturbed. No blood, no prints. Just one thing missing, the driver. They never found her. Then there are the dispatch calls. On paranormal forums, people love posting audio clips they claim are leaked from police scanners. You'll hear stuff like, Unit 12, respond to a noise complaint. Resident says they heard scraping outside the bedroom window. Or, caller says someone's tapping on their garage door with a metal object. Sounds like a tool. Most are harmless. Squirrels, wind, imagination. But every so often, the sound keeps coming, even after police arrive. Now, to be clear, these cases are rarely labeled Hookman, but the patterns are there. Remote locations, scratching sounds reported, vehicles tampered with, no suspect found. It's always just outside the line of certainty, always just enough detail to wonder. There's a story out of Wisconsin that hits this eerie note hard. A 17-year-old girl came home late after visiting friends. She parked in the driveway, locked the doors, and sat for a while scrolling her phone. She told police she heard a tap on the window. She looked up, no one there. Then another tap, lower this time, like it came from below the window frame. When she finally stepped out, she ran to the front door, didn't look back. Next morning, 3 thin, parallel scratches on the car door. Arced, deliberate. Not a key scratch. Not random. Like someone testing the edge of something. But here's the thing with police reports. They don't always say what you want them to. The official explanation? Likely a raccoon, possibly tree limbs. Case closed. But the locals? They know better. They tell their kids to park in the garage. They double-check locks. And they always remember to look over their shoulder before stepping out of the car. So no, there's no FBI file labeled Hookman. No fingerprint database with a match for a man with a prosthetic hook. But if you look closely at enough late-night calls, enough cold cases, enough dents and taps and scratch marks left unexplained, you might start to see something. A pattern, a presence, A shadow that never quite makes it into the official record, but never fully disappears. Maybe that's how he prefers it. A ghost just real enough to almost get caught. Let's talk about sleep. Specifically, the kind of sleep that doesn't come easy. The kind where you lie still in the dark, swearing you heard something just outside your window. A rustle, a tap, that subtle scrape you try to blame on wind or branches, or maybe the neighbor's cat. But deep down, you're already thinking it. Him. It's no coincidence that the Hookman legend is so often told before bed. He's a nighttime figure. Not in the vampire sense, not summoned by the moon. No, he comes because we're vulnerable when the world quiets down. Because that's when your mind replays things. The dumb joke you shouldn't have told. The phone call you're avoiding. The mistake you almost made. And then, right as sleep begins to fog the edges of your thoughts, that old story creeps back in. There's a reason the Hookman haunts campfires, sleepovers, back seats, and bedrooms. It's because his legend was made for the liminal space between waking and dreaming. He doesn't kick down your door. He taps once, maybe twice. He lets you fill in the rest. And isn't that worse? There's an old version of the tale from Vermont that was only ever told at sleepovers. Girls passed it down one sleepover at a time, like a curse that arrived with popcorn and slumber bags. In this version, the Hookman doesn't need to follow you to the woods or the road. You just have to say his name 3 times softly. Into your pillow end he'll come. Not to hurt you, just to watch. And if you make eye contact, he leaves a single hair-thin scratch along the edge of your nightstand. A sign that he was real. A sign that you invited him. Weirdly, some people claim they find that scratch years later. Not big, not dramatic. Just a tiny curve etched into the wood where the polish never quite settled and the light reflects at a slightly different angle. They forget it's there until the story comes back up. Then suddenly, they remember. And they sleep a little closer to the wall that night. The sleepover versions of the Hookman aren't about death. They're about proof. That thing we all want, to be scared and safe at the same time. To feel like we almost encountered something, but made it out untouched. Even now, you'll find threads online where people say, "Okay, weird question, but has anyone else ever heard a scraping sound in their room when they were a kid? Like metal on wood?" And suddenly a dozen replies appear. Some say it was the radiator. Some say dreams. And others? They just say, "I thought I imagined that." Sleep brings back memories. Not just of what happened, but what almost did. The door you forgot to lock that one time. The car you left running just a little too long. The night you thought you heard something move behind the shower curtain, but didn't check. And that's when the Hookman is strongest. Not when you see him. When you almost do. Because once you're in bed, that's it. There's no driving away. No running into the woods. No bravado, no flashlight, no friend to laugh it off. Just you. And that tapping sound that you swear wasn't there a second ago. Let's take a step back now, not away from the Hookman, but away from the fear. Let's look at something stranger. Why do we keep him alive? Because make no mistake, this story, this man with the hook, he's not fading. He's evolving. And he only needs one thing to keep going. You. Legends like the Hookman don't survive by accident. They're kept warm like old fires. Whispered at sleepovers. Posted in comment sections. Redrawn in notebooks and game lore, and late-night Reddit threads tagged True Story. He's been around in some form for over 70 years now, and he hasn't slowed down. Folklorists call it narrative mutation, a process where the story reshapes itself to fit the times. In the 50s, the Hookman punished teenage rebellion. In the 70s, he reflected fears of rising crime. In the 90s, he haunted the back seat of every suburban car. And today, he's in your algorithm, your suggested videos, your haunted TikToks. He is functionally immortal, because every time someone retells his story, they make him new. Some modern writers think of him as a folk meme, not in the LOL sense, but in the virus sense. Self-replicating, changing just enough to avoid immune systems. And the more people hear about him, even casually, the more likely they are to pass it on. You might tell a friend about the time you got scared in the woods. They laugh, add their own story. And just like that, the Hookman lives another day. It's not that we believe the legend, it's that it fits. fits into that primal spot in our minds where rules break down, where cause and effect get fuzzy, where you know you locked the car, but still glance at the back seat, just in case. The Hookman has also crossed genres now. He shows up in horror games often, uncredited but unmistakable. He's made cameos in indie films, comic books, haunted house attractions, even as a Halloween costume. Though, let's be honest, wearing a hook to a party pretty much guarantees no one stands too close. But the real reason he endures? Because he offers us something no other urban legend quite does. A mirror. He reflects your rules, your guilt, your habits and hesitations. He doesn't chase you just because you're outside. He chases you because you're doing something you probably shouldn't. And he doesn't always get you. He waits, judges, and sometimes he lets you go. That uncertainty, that moral shrewdness, why people can't stop telling his story. It invites questions, retellings, arguments. Was he real? Was he a murderer? A ghost? A symbol? Yes. And also, maybe not. Because the Hookman's not one story. He's every story where someone gets too close to the edge and hears that soft, metallic sound of something coming for them. He's not here to punish. He's here to remind you. You're not as alone as you think. So, next time you hear the Hookman come up in a podcast, a storytime video, or a friend's late-night ramble, don't roll your eyes. You're part of the tradition now. You're one more voice in the fog. At this point, you may be wondering, who was the first Hookman? Was he real? Was he invented? Was there ever a person behind the myth? Or was he always meant to be just that, a story? Folklore rarely gives us clear answers, but we can trace whispers. And one of the earliest whispers starts not with horror, but with war. In some versions of the Hookman's origin, he was a veteran, a man who lost his hand in a warsome, say World War II. Others, the Korean Warand, returned home disfigured, struggling to adjust. He was quiet, lonely, sometimes angry, and society, not always kind to broken things, looked away. He replaced his missing hand with a prosthetic, sometimes described as a metal tool, sometimes as a literal hook, the kind used for lifting crates, fishing, survival. But survival didn't always mean peace. In these versions, the transformation happens slowly. He's a man first, then a recluse, then, in the minds of neighbors who don't understand him, something worse. Suspicious, dangerous, strange. A hook where a handshake should be. And you can see how easily a real person, misunderstood and isolated, might become the seed of a legend. There's a well-worn pattern in folklore. Someone disappears under strange circumstances, or a man with a visible wound is spotted near an accident, or a hermit with a metal arm is blamed for a string of bad luck. And from those fragments, a myth is born, not out of evidence, out of need. Communities tell stories like this when they're trying to make sense of fear, fear of outsiders, fear of loneliness, fear of change. And the Hookman, with his mechanical limb and silent judgment, becomes a vessel for all of it. He's what happens when something tragic is left unexplained for too long. One possible real candidate comes from Illinois in the early 1950s. Newspaper archives mention a man living near an abandoned mine who wore a prosthetic arm. Kids claimed he watched them from the tree line. He never spoke to them, never harmed anyone. But when a car was found vandalized nearby, they pointed the finger. No charges were filed, but the town talked. And what the town talked about grew. Other early reports mention a carnival worker, a man with a hook who traveled from town to town. Again, never caught doing anything wrong, but his presence, his look, made people uneasy. One whisper becomes a warning. The warning becomes a story. And suddenly, that man becomes a legend. No one will forge it even though they never really knew him. What's tragic, of course, is the possibility that real people wounded, misunderstood, different may have been folded into the Hookman myth unfairly. That the horror wasn't something they caused, but something done to them. Because that's how stories work sometimes. They consume what's convenient. They smooth over details, swap empathy for mystery, and leave behind a hook, because it's easier to remember than a name. Still, whether born of a real man or pure invention, the Hookman doesn't feel like a full fabrication. He feels like something that could happen. Someone you might have passed on the sidewalk and never noticed. Someone who used to be part of the world, until the world stopped making room for him. And when that happens, legends grow in the cracks. So maybe the first Hookman wasn't a killer. Maybe he wasn't even angry. Maybe he was just left behind. And what people imagined he might do, pushed far enough, became more powerful than anything he actually did. That's the danger of stories. They don't have to be true to be remembered. They just have to be sharp. By now, the Hookman feels less like a single person and more like a ritual. A sequence of details passed down, shared, and reshaped again and again. But let's ask something a little different now. Why do we want to believe in him? Why do we keep telling this same story over decades, generations, across countries and cultures? Because the Hookman legend doesn't just scare us. It orders us. Think about it. At its most basic form, the story is always a warning. Don't go out too late. Don't sneak away with your boyfriend. Don't leave the safety of the car. Don't ignore the rules. It's a bedtime story for teenagers. Except instead of go to sleep or the boogeyman will get you, it's make smart choices or the Hookman will find you. And honestly, that kind of story works. Parents pass it down, not because they believe in hooks and shadows, but because it gives them leverage. It's easier to say, don't drive out to the lake when there's a myth to hang it on. Easier to warn your kid about danger when you wrap it in scrape, scrape, scrape. And whether or not it's real, it sticks. But over time, those warnings become something more. They grow teeth, grow legs. Kids hear it from older siblings, friends, someone's cousin who swears it happened. You hear it enough, and suddenly it isn't just a tale to keep you in line. It's a memory you didn't actually have. There's a strange psychological trick folklore plays called borrowed fear. You hear a story that scared someone else, and your brain codes it as your own. You feel the adrenaline, the breath quickening, the goosebumps, and your brain doesn't ask questions. It just files it away. Avoid long dark roads. Remember the hook. And just like that, the story settles in. One researcher once described urban legends like the Hookman as social antibodies, a way for communities to protect themselves from risk. Tell a scary story, enforce group values, keep people safe. And it works. Not because the Hookman is standing behind every tree, but because you're not sure he isn't. And then there's the thrill. Let's be honest. We like being scared. In small doses. We like telling stories that end with someone screaming and someone laughing. We like pausing just before the end and whispering, "This really happened to someone I know." It's bonding. It's release. It's safe danger. And the Hookman? He's perfect for that. He's just realistic enough to feel possible. A man, a mistake, a hook. You don't need ghosts or demons. No curses. No portals to the underworld. Just a noise in the dark. And one bad decision. And let's not forget, stories like this let us play with consequences without living them. You imagine the sound. You imagine the handprint. You imagine getting out of the car at the wrong time. But in the end, you're fine. You get to wake up. That's the secret power of the Hookman story. It lets you flirt with danger and still go home. So no wonder we keep telling it. No wonder it never fades. Because we need stories that keep us just scared enough. Scared to pause. Scared to sneak out. Scared to roll the window down when we hear that tiny, metallic tap, tap, tap. And just like that, the Hookman lives on. Let's slip now into the quieter corners of the Hookman story, the ones not shouted at sleepovers or dramatized on TikTok. These are the stories that linger, the whispered ones, the ones that don't end with screams, but with questions. There's a version told only in small Midwestern towns. You won't find it on YouTube or Reddit, just tucked into the memories of grandparents who heard it from someone who lived through it. In this version, the Hookman never touches his victims. He simply visits, not to punish, but to test something. They say he walks the perimeter of homes that feel fractured. A fight between parents. A child who cries too often at night. A house where someone sleeps with one eye open. He senses imbalance, like a fault line in the walls. And that's where he shows up. a figure near the hedges, a tap at the third window from the left, a curved scratch on the garage door that wasn't there yesterday. What's unsettling is that no harm ever comes from it. Not directly. People just start acting differently. A father becomes more distant. A mother starts sleeping on the couch. The dog refuses to go into the hallway where the hook marks appeared. And eventually, someone moves out. It's the kind of tale that makes you wonder, is he punishing anyone, or is he just witnessing? A force that shows up when things are already unraveling, like mold that forms only where something is already decaying. Another soft-spoken version comes from a lakeside town in Minnesota. They say the Hookman visits grief, that if someone dies unexpectedly and their loved ones don't properly say goodbye, he might arrive. Not to take them, not to scare them, but to remind them. A woman there once claimed she woke up to find her son's window wide, open despite the storm. On the windowsill, a faint line, arced, etched into the wood like a signature. No wind, no animals, no footprints, just the feeling that someone had come to pay respects. This version of the legend paints the Hookman not as a villain but as a messenger, a liminal being who moves between the living and the dead, carrying tension in one hand and stillness in the other. And when he visits, it means something hasn't been resolved. Of course, most people don't like these versions. They're too quiet, too open-ended. We want action, closure, a scream, not a sign. But the Hookman doesn't work like that. Sometimes, he leaves you with nothing more than the feeling of being watched, or the impression that someone was standing by the road just as you passed by, even if you never saw them. It's like catching a shape in the corner of your vision. It doesn't move, it doesn't speak, but it waits. Not for you to believe, just for you to notice. And once you do, you'll find that the story doesn't scare you the same way anymore. It starts to echo, in silence, in sadness, in all the near misses and almost that mark your life. And that's the quietest truth about the Hookman, that maybe he's not chasing you. Maybe he's just showing up where the world leaves gaps, where grief, guilt, and loneliness fester. Not to hurt you, just to say, I see it too. Let's look now at a stranger corner of the Hookman myth of dreams. Because for some reason, this legend has a habit of showing up in people's sleep, not as a jump scare, not even always as a monster, but as a presence. And those dreams, they leave something behind. In one of the oldest oral versions, passed down through Appalachian folktales, the Hookman doesn't appear in the flesh, comes in your dreams before you ever meet him. They say it starts with a hallway, always the same, dim, flickering overhead lights, a metallic smell in the air, damp floor tiles. You walk down this hallway barefoot, always barefoot, and at the very end, there's a closed door. Sometimes you open it, sometimes you don't. But if you do, you never see him. You just hear the hook, dragging behind him. Modern dream accounts are weirder still. People online report recurring dreams they didn't know were part of the Hookman legend, only to discover others had the exact same structure. A long car ride at night, an empty road that loops in impossible ways, a hitchhiker missing a hand, or wearing a black coat with something clinking under the sleeve. When asked how the dream ended, most say the same thing. I woke up when he tapped the glass. No one knows where these dreams started. Are they viral folklore in sleep form? Are people just borrowing details from stories they've forgotten they heard? Or is it the other way around? Are the stories coming from the dreams? One of the eeriest aspects of this recurring dream motif is the way people describe waking up. The room feels colder than usual. A sense of being watched, not scared, just noticed. And, occasionally, a faint metallic scent, like pennies on an old radiator. It's never dramatic, just off enough to make you stare at the corner of the room a little longer before rolling over. Some therapists believe the Hookman dreams reflect suppressed anxiety, that the hook itself symbolizes something unfinished, a loop that never closes. Others go further. They suggest the dream Hookman isn't trying to hurt you at all. He's simply the part of your mind that catalogs regret, the things you didn't say, the person you let walk away, the moment you saw something wrong and stayed silent. The hook drags behind him because you're the one who left it there. In one forum thread, a user recounted having the same Hookman dream for 10 years. They stopped having it the day they reached out to someone they'd cut off after an argument years before. When they reconnected, the dreams vanished. Now, is that proof of anything? No. But that's the thing about the Hookman. He doesn't need proof to feel real. He just needs a detail you can't explain. A dream that feels too specific. A rhythm you recognize before you even hear it. So if you ever wake up from a dream about an endless road, or a shadow standing just outside your car, or the sound of something metal tapping at your window just before you open your eyes, don't panic. But maybe, take a moment to think about what you've been avoiding. What regrets might be scratching to get your attention? Because if you don't, well, you might find yourself dreaming of that hallway again. And this time, you might open the door. Now let's dim the lights a little more, because where we're headed is the Hookman's strangest evolution yet. He's no longer just a campfire story. Not a dream, not just a whisper in a car. He's something else now, something conceptual. In some circles, they don't even call him the Hookman anymore. They call him the Reminder. This idea starts with a simple premise. The Hookman isn't a man at all. He's not flesh and blood, not even a ghost. He's a manifestation of conscience. A force that appears whenever you're at a crossroads, literal or moral. He shows up when you're about to make a choice, or when you already have. And the hook? That's just the symbol, the shape your brain gives the feeling of being caught between right and wrong. This version of the legend doesn't rely on scratches or sightings. Instead, he's an urge. You're driving too fast, and suddenly feel the need to slow down. You're about to sneak out when a feeling of dread stops you cold. You open a message you shouldn't, and think you hear something behind you, even though you're alone. That's him, the reminder. The tap on the glass just before you go too far. In some spiritual communities, this version of the Hookman is even treated like a kind of guardian. Not benevolent, not warm, but present. Like a cold wind through a crack in the door, uninvited, but not entirely unwelcome. There's an odd little belief that circulates quietly in places like alt Tumblr blogs and occult message boards. It goes like this. The Hookman only hurts people who ignore him. In this version, he's not punishing sin, he's acknowledging choice. You can sneak away with the car keys. You can take the wrong exit. You can cross the line. But if you do, and you hear the sound of metal dragging on pavement afterward, that's not vengeance. That's the sound of the debt being marked. It's a chilling idea, that he's not chasing you. He's just noting what you did, adding it to a long, invisible ledger you didn't know you were part of. And maybe, if enough marks pile up, maybe then the hook turns sharp. Some storytellers have taken this concept and run with it. There are podcasts now that reimagine the Hookman as a kind of moral accountant. He doesn't appear randomly. He appears when the balance tips. A couple breaks a promise. A friend betrays another. Someone takes something that doesn't belong to them. And that night, they hear the scrape on the windowsill, or the knock on the trunk of their car. Or, if they're lucky, just the voice. One more. This modern Hookman is not a slasher villain. He doesn't scream, doesn't chase, doesn't need to. Because what's scarier than a punishment you can't predict? A judgment you can't explain? A force that shows up not when you're most afraid, but when you're most ashamed? In the oldest legends, the Hookman was a warning. In these new ones, he's a reckoning. Not evil, just thorough. And if that unsettles you, if you've ever heard something outside and thought, no, it can't be him, then maybe you already know which side of the ledger you're on. So let's follow that thought. If the Hookman is a reckoning, if he shows up not to punish but to balance, then where does that leave us? What happens when someone escapes him? Do they get to leave? Or does the Hookman simply wait? There's a branch of the legend that rarely gets mentioned. It's the survivor version. The one where the Hookman doesn't kill, doesn't even touch. He just lets you go. But he always leaves something behind. In the 1980s, a girl in Arkansas claimed to have escaped the Hookman by locking her car and refusing to look out the windows. She stayed parked for hours. No radio, no movement, just breathing in the dark. When morning came, there was no damage to the car. Just a note under the wiper blade. Smart girl. She never saw anyone, never heard anything but her own pulse. But the story spread. And the lesson? Sometimes survival means inaction, not running, not screaming, just waiting, enduring. Another story comes from British Columbia. A man hiking solo claimed he got lost just before sunset, found an old watchtower and hunkered down for the night. Around midnight, he heard dragging footsteps outside. Slow, deliberate. He stayed silent, held his breath. The next morning, nothing was disturbed. The snow was untouched, except for a single trail, a crescent-shaped groove in the frozen ground, circling the tower once. These stories have a strange tone. Not triumph, not relief, just residue. The sense that something happened, something that didn't escalate but still mattered. It's that concept of being marked, of walking away with the story, even if you never saw the face. There are people who claim they've had moments like that. A sound, a flash of shadow, a memory they can't shake, even if nothing happened. They say the Hookman gave them a pass, but not a pardon. And they know better than to test him twice. These survivor tales feel more honest than the dramatic ones, because they don't promise justice. They don't promise horror. They just promise reminder that the line between safe and gone is thin, that you can get lucky, but that luck comes with awareness. You don't joke about it after. You don't tempt fate again. There's even a phrase whispered in these versions: if you make it out, don't look back. And that's haunting in its own way. Not because you'll see him, but because maybe you won't. And that would mean you were never meant to see him in the first place. So maybe that's the deepest fear. Not dying, not being found, but being chosen, then spared. Because if the Hookman let you go, that means he knows you now. And what he waits for is the moment you forget him. Now let's turn to the towns. Not the legends, not the stories, but the places that carry the Hookman's shadow like a stain. Because almost every region has one. A specific road, a bridge, a parking lot. Somewhere people say, don't go there at night, not unless you want to hear him. And what's strange is how similar these places are, even when separated by thousands of miles. Take Lover's Lane in Dallas, Texas. Locals say it's where the Hookman hunts most often. A gravel turnoff from a wooded road, quiet, out of sight, perfect for teenagers trying to escape watchful eyes. The legend goes, if you turn your headlights off and leave your windows cracked, he might pay you a visit. You'll hear the tap first, then the drag, then silence. And if you're lucky, that's all you'll get. Move north, and the stories shift, but only slightly. In Michigan, they speak of an old iron bridge that creaks when no one is on it. Folks swear they've seen a single hook suspended from a beam above swaying, just enough to catch the moonlight. Kids dare each other to walk across at midnight. Some come back laughing. Some come back shaken. One boy came back with a deep scratch across his coat straight through the fabric, but not the skin. The hook missed. Or maybe it didn't mean to hit him. Then there's Whistling Woods, just outside Portland. There, the Hookman doesn't scratch. He whistles. Just 3 notes. Low, repeating. Always from a direction you aren't facing. And when you turn, nothing's there. But sometimes, a tree nearby will have a single, fresh gouge in the bark hook-shaped wet, like it happened moments ago. What's most unsettling is how no one claims ownership of these stories. They're not tied to a book, a movie, a date. They emerge, like mildew, from places with just enough emptiness to allow fear to settle in. The locals don't make a fuss, don't dramatize. They just avoid. And that silence, that avoidance, that's how you know the story has roots. There's even a term for this phenomenon in folklore studies. Legend, tripping. It's when people deliberately visit haunted locations to test the myth. And almost always, the Hookman is part of the top 10. In some rural towns, people have gone a step further. They've added rules to the spots. Don't walk there on foot. Don't wear headphones. Don't speak while crossing. Always leave a coin near the path when you go. That last one is especially eerie, a sort of toll. Like the Hookman isn't just haunting these spots, but guarding them, or charging rent for the space he takes in your mind. And when someone breaks the rules, the stories begin. Flat tires, dead batteries, photos that don't develop, or worse, photos that do and show something behind you. Something tall. Something not quite there. Of course, not everyone believes, but even skeptics find themselves speeding up when they cross that bridge, checking their mirrors, avoiding the dirt pull-off even though it would make a perfect shortcut, because there's a difference between disbelief and invitation. You don't have to believe in the Hookman, but if you go looking for him, you'd better be ready to find him. We've traced the roads, we've wandered the forests, we've listened to the whispers in dreams, and stared too long into the dark corners of memory. But there's one more place the Hookman lives. Inside you. And before that sounds too poetic or dramatic, hear me out. Every scary story needs something familiar. Something ordinary. Something just real enough to take root. And the Hookman? He's built on the most familiar fear of all. That you're being watched. Not from afar. Not by strangers. But by consequence. He taps into something ancient. Our fear of crossing a line, even by accident. And unlike other urban legends, ghosts, ghouls, Monster She doesn't come from the supernatural. He comes from the natural. From the way your breath catches when you pass a mirror at night. From the second guessing after you say something cruel. From the chill that runs down your spine when you sense someone standing behind you, only to find no one there. That's his domain. The in-between. Some psychologists call this phenomenon embodied folklore, where your body reacts to a story long after your mind has forgotten the details. You flinch when you hear a sharp scrape. You check your back seat without realizing it. You pause at a parking lot edge and think, maybe I'll walk someone out. And that pause, that hesitation, it's the Hookman. He becomes a shorthand for the quiet voice in your head. The one that says, don't leave the door unlocked. Maybe text them back and say sorry. Turn the lights on before you go down there. He's not always malevolent. Sometimes he's just a gut check. A reminder that your actions echo if not into myth, then at least into memory. There's a story I once read, barely a paragraph long. An anonymous forum post, now long deleted. The poster said, I don't believe in the Hookman, but I do keep an old coat hook hanging on the wall in my hallway. I tell people it's for nostalgia, but the truth is, if I ever find it pointing in the opposite direction than I left it, I'll know he was here, and I'll know I did something I need to fix. That's the Hookman at his most potent. A symbol, a presence, a lesson you crave in when you don't realize it. In the end, the Hookman might not be watching you. You might be watching yourself, and that's the genius of his legend. He doesn't need to appear to be real. He just needs to make you wonder, did I do the right thing? Because once you ask that, he's already done his job. And so, the hook isn't just for fear. It's for reflection. A curved shape that mirrors the very question at the heart of every urban legend. What if? What if you'd locked the door? What if you hadn't looked back? What if you hadn't dared yourself to go a little further into the dark? He doesn't need to answer. He just stands there, waiting. Until you do. Let's step back into the real world for a moment, or at least, the edge of it. Because for all the fear, for all the mystery, there's something almost comforting about the Hookman. Strange, right? But stay with me. He shows up when we feel uneasy, when we take a turn we shouldn't, when we lie, when we forget to check the back seat, and the idea that there's someone out there watching not to condemn, but to remind? It's eerie, yes, but it's also grounding, because the Hookman is consistent. He doesn't change with trends. He doesn't need social media to spread. He just waits in the same dark places we've always feared. Behind doors, in the woods, on roads that vanish from GPS just when the fog rolls in. He's a fixed point in a world that keeps spinning faster. And maybe that's part of his appeal. The Hookman is old school, analog, low-tech terror. No screens, no glitching, no haunted apps. Just a man and a hook. And the idea that he's out there somewhere trailing behind every moment you hope no one notices. He reminds us that stories don't need to be big to be scary. They just need to feel close. That's what makes him different from other legends. He's not the monster in the forest. He's the sound next to your tent. And the places that still tell his story, they're keeping more than folklore alive. They're keeping a language alive. A language of warnings and quiet rules, of soft taps on windows and words whispered just before sleep. You don't need to say his name to know what's meant when someone asks, Did you hear that? That's why the Hookman will never disappear. Because even if the name fades, even if new versions pop up with different clothes or names or backstories, he's not going anywhere. Not as long as we keep listening for the scrape. He's not here for chaos. He's not chasing you down hallways. He's just checking in. On the part of you that still wonders, am I safe? Did I go too far? Is someone out there judging me? And when you ask those questions, he answers with silence. Because that's all he's ever needed. To be there when your thoughts are loudest and the world is quietest. So maybe you don't believe in him. Maybe you've never seen a scratch, never heard the hook, never woken up from a dream where someone was walking just behind you. But if, one night, you hear that sound, that unmistakable metallic drag, soft and patient, and you pause, even just for a moment, well, that's all he needed. And here we are. You've made it through the story, through woods and roads and windows that shouldn't have opened, through dreamscapes and quiet warnings, through the lives of those who vanished, and the ones who made it back changed, but breathing. You've met the Hookman in all his forms. The killer, the protector, the mirror, the myth. And now, in this final stretch, you may find yourself wondering, what was he really? Let's take a final walk together, down the darkest trail, the one that loops back to where it all began. Because the Hookman, despite all the scratched metal and distant footsteps, was never about him. He's about you. He's about the part of your mind that drifts just before sleep, wondering if the door is truly locked. He's about the decisions you carry like pebbles in your pocket, small, forgettable, until you hear the tap. He's about caution, regret, and the tiny, sharp sound that comes with growing up and realizing the scariest monsters are the ones that ask nothing of you, just a moment of silence, and then leave behind a mark that only you can see. And yet, despite all that, he never really hurts you, does he? Not in the ways that last. He almost catches you, almost leaves a scar, almost opens the door, and then lets you go. Not out of kindness, but because the story needs to stay alive. Because if he ever did get you, truly get you, the tale would stop there. But it hasn't. You're still here. Still listening, still checking the back seat, still pausing at that sound you're pretending not to hear. And that, more than anything else, is how you know the Hookman is real. Not as a man with a weapon, but as a presence you've carried since the first time someone told you, don't go out there, not tonight. So if you find yourself someday on a road like the ones we've wandered tonight, and the fog starts to curl around your headlights, and the music cuts out, and the car suddenly feels just a little too still, don't panic. Just remember the rules. Lock the doors. Don't look back. Don't open the window for a sound you can't see. And if you make it through the night, well, you'll have a story of your own, won't you? And now, the road grows quiet. The shadows retreat. The air softens. Let the weight of this story slip from your shoulders, like a coat you don't need anymore. You're safe here. In the hush between memory and myth, the Hookman is far away now, tucked back into the corners of legend where he's always belonged. He won't follow you into your dreams tonight, unless, of course, you leave the window open. But even then, he's patient. He waits. And you've earned your rest. Let your breathing slow. Let your muscles relax, one by one, like leaves sinking gently into still water. The world is quieter now. The scraping has stopped, and all that remains is the soft sound of your heartbeat and the promise that morning will come, like it always does. No hooks, no fear, just the cool air of the in-between, where stories wait for their next telling. Thank you for being here tonight, for walking the path, for keeping the legend alive. And now, close your eyes, sleep deeply, and if you dream, may it be of locked doors and warm blankets and headlights leading you home.